Air Committee event today. I am joined here with an esteemed panel of speakers, all representing member organizations of the U.S. Climate Action Network. This side event aims to provide information on a campaign launched in 2023 by member organizations of the U.S. Climate Action Network with the goal of putting pressure on U.S. decision makers and the era of fossil fuel, ensure a just transition, and pay a fair share of the cost of a global transition from fossil fuel extraction. The United States must be a key player in the global transformation to a just and equitable energy system by quickly phasing out fossil fuels, swiftly transitioning to renewable energy, and rapidly implementing a fully funded, just and equitable energy system, eliminating fossil fuel-based products. Substantial obstacles remain, and even more in light of the recent election of Donald Trump. Yet, no matter who was elected, our movement still needed to hold steadfast in our demand for a fossil fuel phase out by 2031. Both the Trump administration and the Biden administration took actions that supported additional oil and gas drilling. The Biden administration gave the go-ahead for the nation's largest oil drilling operation in Alaska and the Inflation and Reduction Act of 2022, while a historic climate law included additional oil and gas leasing and incentives to capture carbon dioxide. As mentioned, our work is harder with the upcoming Trump administration, as they will be aggressively pro-fossil fuels and anti-environmental regulations. In addition to my role with the Alliance of Nurses for Healthy Environments, I am a nurse by training. In studies, there shows that hundreds of thousands of people have already died because of fossil fuel-driven climate change. The health of many around the world is being negatively impacted by the climate crisis, degradation of air quality, and the poisoning of communities living closest to fossil fuel infrastructure. Our lives and our health are on the line. So each of the panelists is going to talk more about what does this 5S phase out mean, but just to give you a really brief snapshot. So the FAST means on a timeline consistent with the best available climate science and the Paris Agreement. It means prioritizing actions to stop fossil fuel expansion and achieve deep emission reductions in the next few years. Full means reducing the global extraction and burning of fossil fuels to zero by 2050 at the latest, and much sooner in the U.S. and other rich mega polluting countries most responsible for fueling the climate crisis. And this means no dangerous distraction or false solution. Fair means economically and socially just to center people overburdened by fossil pollution and those most affected by the economic destruction of a transition away from fossil fuels. It also means striving to correct inequities caused by historical pollution. Funded means that we need wealthy global north countries to pay their fair share for fossil fuel phase out and get behind proposals for democratic control of our global financial goals and institutions. And then Feminist highlights that a fossil fuel economy is incompatible with real climate action and a transition to a regenerative, care-based economy that sustains life and well-being for all is required. And this campaign demands a gender-just transition in feminist climate finance. So as I mentioned, each of our speakers will provide further context surrounding each of these aspects of the campaign, and we'll discuss how we overcome these challenges and work for an equitable phase out of fossil fuels in the United States. So first, I'm going to turn it over to Hailey Campbell. Hailey Campbell is co-executive director of Cara Climate. Hailey is a climate justice advocate and climate policy educator, empowering young people with the confidence and skills to make an impact on climate policy, intergenerational justice, and gender mainstreaming. There you go. All right. Hi everyone. I'm just going to move it on. We're good. All right. So thank you all so much for joining. I really wanted to start as someone who's speaking to a young person speaking to the fast portion of this event. There isn't a generation, I think, more concerned about the speed at which we are
not tackling the climate crisis on its current moment. And so here we see from Climate Action Tracker, this is December 2023 update, that really we are not on track at all, even if all of the policies and actions that we were to do were implemented. We also just saw from the emissions gap report that although it's already on track to warm by 1.5 degrees pretty much this year immediately. And so now we're going to be seeing those impacts of our choices really unfolding in the next decades of impacts that are going to affect my generation the most. And so something that I want to know is that one of the reasons that we believe care about climate, that the speed at which we are tackling climate crisis is not going fast enough, is because there is a lack of equity in a lot of the NDCs that have been produced. Here we have a map of our NDC equity tracker, which is a project that trains and empowers young people to analyze their country's climate commitments for ambitions on emissions, gender mainstreaming, and generational justice. And as you can see, the 54 NDCs and 80 countries represented here, it's not looking great. This is an average of scores again on emissions, gender, and generational justice. And you can see that a lot of the countries that are not necessarily the most responsible tend to be doing better on their pollution, and therefore they also have better NDC contact. And so it's really important in this context that we know that we're not moving fast enough, we're not moving equitably enough, and we're not doing enough in gender readiness. And other countries are not doing enough. And so, with that point, there we go. I wanted to kind of shake this up a little bit into kind of envisioning of the future that we have in our hands right now as we're thinking about the phase out of fossil fuels in our future. And so, if everyone could just take a minute, maybe take a deep breath and have a stressful day. And jump into the year 2050. This is the year that allegedly people from my generation will have hopefully a lot more decision-making power than we do today. And in this world, climate change has become the world of extremes. The landscapes are marked by failures of the past generations to act in time. Climate crisis that was once a distant threat arrived with an unpredictable practice. It's reshaped every corner of our day. My teammate Ruth, who is not here today, so I can just incriminate this story, sitting on a cracked concrete step of what really used to be her family's home, her community, their farm. And the sun is setting, and instead of that nice hazy orange that we see, it's just filled with barren fields and air pollution. The horizon that used to look almost like a painting, with beautiful colors that she remembers as a kid, now just instead of the color of fire and ash, but also a reminder of itself. And as a child, the farm for her was a picture of the promise of the future, much of the promises we've heard about NDCs today. All of these promises of restoring nature, of having 1.5 line NDCs, all just reminders of the failures that have happened. Her friends that live on the coast and islands have experienced the same tragic fate. Ruth's grandparents recall the glimmer of hope at the end of the 2020s. And at first when the Earth surpassed 1.5 degrees, which is today. Impacts are slow. Countries have made their commitments to 1.5 line NDCs. Commitments to include gender and intergenerational collaboration, decision making, and commitments to stopping deforestation and settling more. Climate scientists have warned the world. World leaders debated, and corporations continue to lobby the status quo. And by the time the tipping points had arrived in 2030, it was too late to reverse the damage. The broken promises accompanied irreversible damages. This is a photo that what recently happened during the hurricanes that hit the United States. And this is just an example of the many things that will be hit. At the age of 25 and 2050, Earth has returned what it was given. Pollution, sickness, loss of life, loss of love, promises of renewable energy, economy, climate action, urgency, and While most people think the stories of advocates who fought for the future are urban legends, they're still there though. We're still there. They're still fighting to save us that. And this is a really important. Oh, into the public. All right. Urgent actions. More distraction. This is. So I also want to paint a picture of a different future, of a new hope, of NDCs that show alignment with 1.5 degrees for the very first time that we have an opportunity to set here by the end of February or March 1st. Instead of being impacted by irreversible damage, 2050 could be impacted by rapid transformation. A landscape marked not by the failures of the past, but by the triumphs and resilience of collective action of everyone sitting here on the stage and everyone out there. The climate crisis arrived in full force at first, but it was met with an equally powerful response, an unwavering commitment to climate justice that really spanned across our generations. We finally got intergenerational collaboration right. Young people not only have a seat at the table, but they're there as decision makers time in. In this vision of the world, Ruth recalls her grandparents' words of the turning point instead of the disaster point. The moment when Earth surpassed 1.5 degrees of warming and the stakes became undeniable. The impacts were slow at first, but the signs really were everywhere. The wildfires, the flooding, the glaciers. The world reached its breaking point. But so did the leadership. In the wake of the crisis, nations had come together in windows unimaginable in their decades. Countries with historic responsibility, like the United States, came together to act on the climate crisis. They stepped up first, reducing their emissions by 2035, investing in nature instead of false solutions, and delivering climate finance to save parents and poor communities that they had harmed the ground. Deforestation also came to an end by 2030, thanks to a lot of the indigenous stewardship and leadership and the power of local campaigns that they had. Cities around the world are transformed, adopting green technologies, decarbonizing energy systems, and shifting to a circular economy. The fossil fuel industry's once big giants were dismantled and replaced by renewable energy cooperatives, run by local communities and supported by international organizations. The ocean too has reclaimed its balance. Waves no longer symbolize loss. They represent resilience and joy. Climate change isn't just a memory of the past, but a part of everyday discussions of education. This was the fight of generations, unified in demanding change, building a future where the earth and communities could thrive in harmony once again. So right now, we have the opportunity to help write that next chapter. This chapter is one of maintaining the care that we're all serving for each other and for the planet right now, of continuing to nurture the fragile balance that is nature. It's now up to Ruth's generation to ensure that the Earth's gift of resilience is passed on to generations that come. And so as we think about how we move forward into fast and ambitious and inclusive nature of NDCs that we need to see, especially from the United States, regardless of what's to come in the future, there's an opportunity here for the US to set us up for success instead of going back on promises, instead of doing damage control in the future. There's opportunity for this NDC to be as ambitious as possible, because really we don't have anything to lose at this point. So we might as well go full send, as we like to say, my generation. And so with that, I want to end by saying, if you have an opportunity to discuss the NDC with our government, with your governments, not with the US, I really encourage you to encourage them to also go full send and to make sure that these emission reductions commitments are not just what we need to have a barely livable future, to really have a sustained, harmonizing, and joyful future where we don't have to dread the impacts of climate change. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Hailey. I'm gonna turn it over to Roishetta, who is joining us virtually. I'll introduce her while they're pulling her out. So Roishetta Sibley Ozane is the founder of Vessel Project Louisiana, a mutual aid and environmental justice organization. Roishetta also serves as the household finance coordinator with the Tax Campaign for the Environment Fund. Roishetta's primary focus has been championing for the rights of Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities, advocating for clean air, clean water, and sustainable communities that are not burdened by fossil fuel build out. Roishetta? Oh, we can hear you. Perfect, go for it.
Okay. Yes, hi, everybody, thank you so much. Sorry I'm not on camera, I'm having some technical difficulties, but hopefully you all can hear me very well. Good morning to everybody. I am here today because we are demanding a full fair, phase out of fossil fuels. And I'm here to talk about what that means in the terms of a fair phase out. So here in my community in Southwest Louisiana, the air smells like rotten egg, our water is poison, our air is poison, our children are being sick. It is not fair that our communities are constantly overburdened by fossil fuel pollution, and our government here in the United States is telling us that this is for the world, this is for the benefit of other communities across the fund. Communities who have told us that they are moving towards a phase out, communities that we are in coalition with, who don't want our communities at risk, nor do they want their communities at risk. So here at the Frontline Environmental Justice League, I'm here because we are at a critical juncture, and it is time that the Biden administration, that this current administration really does something serious as it relates to climate, and phasing out fossil fuels. When we talk about a fair phase out, we're talking about, taking a crucial step towards achieving a sustainable future and addressing the urgent climate crisis. This transition is not only about reducing carbon emissions, but also about ensuring that the process is equitable and just for all communities, particularly those that have been historically marginalized. We're talking about incorporating environmental justice principles into this phase out of fossil fuels, because it is essential for creating a more equitable society and addressing the systemic inequalities that have often accompanied environmental policy. The importance of a fair phase out of fossil fuels lies in its potential to mitigate climate change, which disproportionately affects vulnerable populations. Climate change exacerbates existing inequalities in Black, brown, indigenous, and other people of color communities who are already lacking resources to adapt to its impact. For example, in low-income Black neighborhoods, we are more susceptible to flooding, heat waves, and other climate-related disasters due to our inadequate infrastructure and the lack of access to emergency services. Our community is overflowing with fossil fuel pollution, yet many of our communities don't have access to fresh produce, clean water. Here in Southwest Louisiana, some of our communities, they have to cross over a bridge to get to town. Many people don't even have transportation or cars.
Roishetta, I think we lost you for a minute. You're speaking still. Okay, so, yeah. Okay, so if we get Roishetta back, we can look back to her, but for now, I'll just move this along, and introduce our next speaker, who is, Jacob Johns, who is a Hopi and Akimel environmental defender, leading the Indigenous Wisdom Keepers Delegation at COP29, and a community support organizer with the Backbone Campaign. Jacob leads the Wisdom Keepers approach, which is aimed at catalyzing a unified global response to climate change, bridging the gap between spiritual aspirations and practical policy thinking. Up to you, Jacob.
Thank you so much for that. Jacob Johns. I'm here as an organizer with the Wisdom Keepers Delegation. We're an international collective of Indigenous wisdom keepers and activists around the world that co-create contemporary climate policy that advance underneath the umbrella of the UNFCCC. For centuries, indigenous people have resisted the exploitation of our lands and our resources. And we have stood against colonialism, extraction, and destruction, not just for the survival of ourselves, but for the survival of all life here on the planet. And today we face the same struggle, but under new names: carbon offsets, geoengineering, and market-based carbon trading mechanisms. These so-called answers to climate change are nothing more than a continuation of the same exploitative mindset that has brought us to this point. Many of these false solutions are being discussed at the COP, including carbon capture and storage, CCS, and so-called nature-based solutions that prioritize the commodification of ecosystems and carbon trading schemes. These approaches benefit rich, large corporations while ignoring the needs of frontline communities and indigenous peoples globally. Carbon trading does nothing more but give the rich nations a license to pollute. They ignore the voices of those who have been fighting to protect the earth long before climate change became a global threat to our shared existence. Carbon trading does nothing more than offer false solutions, often promise a quick fix for the multi-layered complex climate crisis, but they are nothing more than illusions that are designed to pacify the masses while the root causes of destruction continue unabated. These false solutions are dangerous because they divert our attention and our resources, prolonging the injustices faced by indigenous peoples, frontline communities, and the ecosystems that we all depend on for survival. They enable those in power to pretend that progress is being made while the crisis worsens and the most vulnerable among us suffer the consequences. These false solutions are nothing short of betrayal. They sidestep the necessary systematic changes that we so desperately need, allowing the most outrageous polluters to continue to business as usual while presenting an illusion of progress. They promise technological fixes to problems that are fundamentally about relationships, our relationship to the earth and with each other. But the truth is stark. These solutions do not address the deep roots of the problem. They are designed to serve those who prioritize profit over the well-being of our planet and its people. And they sacrifice the most marginalized communities in the process. Corporations, no matter how much greenwashing they do, will continue to pollute our shared world. And we must remember that capitalism will not save our planet. The growing entanglement of corporations and government power aligns with Mussolini's very definition of fascism, a dangerous merger that threatens our freedoms and our environment. And what is more alarming is that we are being asked to give consent to this merger in the name of environmental protection. This blatant collusion is happening right in front of our faces, and it's disguised as progress, while the true cost is borne by our communities and the future of our planet. Indigenous resistance is about protecting the land and the water and the air for future generations. It is about honoring our ancestors and fulfilling our sacred responsibilities to the land that sustains us. Real solutions must uplift community-led initiatives and support a just transition to renewable energy and renew and honor the wisdom of indigenous peoples who have stewarded the earth for generations. We all know that our survival is interconnected and that the health of the land is directly tied to the health of our communities. And our way of life is grounded in reciprocity, in the recognizing that we are a part of the larger whole, and that our well-being depends on the well-being of all living beings. We know that we are nature. We know that we are the earth, and that we must use our voices and speak for the planet. The leadership of indigenous communities is not optional. In the fight against climate change, it is essential. We offer pathways rooted in respect and sustainability and values that are often missing in the dominant discourse on climate solutions. We know that the earth is not a resource to be exploited, but a living entity who we are a part of and we are in relationship with, and that we embody. We understand that the future depends on our ability to live in balance and to give back as much as we take and to respect the natural limits of this world. To ignore the wisdom is to doom ourselves to repeating the same mistakes that have brought us to the brink of catastrophe. We need a paradigm shift that centers justice and accountability and true sustainability, not false hopes and corporate greenwashing. Capitalism will not save itself. The same systems that have exploited our lands and resources cannot be trusted to protect them now. The capitalist model built on the relentless extraction of natural resources prioritizes short-term gains for a few over the long-term health of our entire planet and the well-being of our people. It's a system that thrives on inequality where the cost of pollution and environmental degradation are pushed onto the most vulnerable, while profits are funneled into the hands of those who are in power. This model is fundamentally incompatible with the urgent need to address the climate crisis. To believe that capitalism in its current form can solve the very problems that it is created is a naive and is dangerous. We must move beyond the illusion that market forces alone can lead us to a sustainable future. Instead, we need an economic system that values life over profit and recognizes this intrinsic worth of the natural world and the places, community, equity, and ecological balance at the center of its priority. We need to fundamentally rethink our economic priorities and recognize that profit cannot come at the expense of our collective future. We must also recognize the growing alignment between corporations and governments around the world, a trend that should be feared and scrutinized. Once again, this is the literal definition of fascism described by Mussolini. Emerging of corporate power and state power when corporations wield undue influence over governmental policies, the result is a system that serves only the interests of the powerful at the cost of our collective freedoms, our environment, and our communities. This dangerous consolidation of power must be resisted. If we are to build a future that is healthy and just and livable, we need to listen and apply the voices of those who have been on the front lines, those who have resisted destruction for generations, and those who continue to fight for a future that is healthy and just and livable for all. We must also listen to the knowledge holders who have been trying to contribute to policy discussions for years, whose wisdom and experience are crucial in shaping effective climate solutions. The time for half measures and empty promises is over. We are on the brink of catastrophe. We can no longer afford to delay or deny the reality of what needs to be done. And it is time to support real solutions led by Indigenous people and frontline communities. It is about time to stand together in defense of the earth, for our children and for generations to come, and for the very future of life on this planet. The consequences of inaction are severe, and entire ecosystems are collapsing. Species are going extinct and communities are being displaced. The climate crisis is not some distant threat. It's not far off. It's not our children's problem. It's now. It is right here. If we do not take bold and immediate actions, the sufferings will only intensify. And we must rise to meet this moment with courage and with unity and integrity and with unwavering commitment to justice. The stakes could not be higher at this pivotal moment in time. We, as a Wisdom Keepers delegation, arm in arm with our comrades here on this panel, call the world to reject false solutions and commit to stopping the pollution at its source. It's time to address the problem directly and not with half measures or illusion, but by ending pollution where it begins. We are at the brink of destruction. As ecosystems collapse, we are seeing the destruction of what we knew as life. And those who became before us will think of this moment in time as the end. But the young people and those who come after us will think of this moment as the beginning. And we must recognize that as the systems fall, it's a representation of fascism and oppressive systems falling, that these grasps at power are the death rattle of these oppressive systems. And these oppressive systems are struggling to continue to maintain power. And we are the ones who must find the seed of creation inside of the destruction that is all around us. We must emanate the future that we truly desire through unity, through solidarity, and through strength. I encourage you all to think about the solutions that are being discussed here and remember that pollution needs to be stopped at its source. Thank you.
So much, Jane. I'm told that we have Roishetta back. Roishetta, can you try speaking again and we'll see if we can hear you. Yes, thank you, Roishetta.
Oh, my goodness, I don't know where to get out. I was making no point about their phase out and what it should include. Their phase out about the two should include measures to ensure that the communities that have been most impacted by the overburden of pollution and what it needs to survive and thrive. For example, our lowest black people of color communities are more susceptible to flooding, heat waves, and other climate related disasters due to inadequate infrastructure and a lack of access to emergency services. Incorporating these environmental justice principles into a phase out process. This will ensure that community members who are on the front line have access to clean water, clean air, and everything else that they need to survive and thrive in their community. This means involving us in the process. Those of us who have historically been impacted have been left out of discussion. We have not had an equitable seat at the table. In order to have a fair phase out, a true transition that includes involving us, listening to our solutions and taking our solutions into consideration. Our voice is central in identifying solutions that work for our country, thereby empowering us and ensuring that our needs are met. Moreover, a fair phase out should include measures to protect and create jobs in renewable energy sectors and ensuring that those of us who live on the front line have access, equitable, fair access to these jobs. We know many times when fossil fuel companies come to our community, that is one of their catchphrases that they're going to bring jobs. We also know that the people who are most affected by this pollution, we don't receive those jobs. Or the contract jobs, the temporary jobs, they go away quickly, and we still don't make enough money to afford to live in the very community that's killing us. It is time that we have fair access to those renewable jobs that will come down the pipeline here in fair phase out of fossil fuel pollution. Additionally, a fair transition should be supported by policy that provide access to affordable and clean energy for our community. Investing in renewable energy infrastructure in our underserved areas will help to reduce our energy costs and improve access to clean energy sources. This will ensure that the benefits of the transition are distributed equitably rather than exacerbating existing inequalities. A fair phase out is vital for us to address the climate emergency that we're in. But the only way that this phase out is going to be fair and equitable, the only way that it's going to be a true just transition is that frontline communities, those who have been disproportionately impacted, are at the front of the line, helping to shape the decision, are included in the process, have equitable fair access, ensuring that environmental justice principles are incorporated into this phase out, and ensuring that we are not again having more dependency on fossil fuels by incorporating fossil fuels. This is not a just phase out. Bringing things into our communities like carbon capture and storage, direct air capture, all this, nitrogen hubs and all these things are not what a just transition entails. It's not fair to continuously overburden the with face things that we don't even know will work. So I urge everyone with the decision makers here at top and here locally in the United States to please listen to everyone who's been on this panel today, all about suggestions, all about solutions. Because like to say, those who are closest to the problem are closest to the solution. Take our solution seriously and put out solutions first. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Roishetta. I'll turn it over to our next speaker, who is Kelly Stone, Senior Policy Analyst at ActionAid USA. Kelly works on climate advocacy, representing ActionAid at the UNFCCC during the Paris Agreement negotiations. Her climate advocacy work has focused on both the UNFCCC negotiations and the US government, specifically on net zero greenwashing, bioenergy, and ambition implications of climate action. She's also worked extensively on climate finance, equity, and market mechanisms.
Thank you so much and good evening, everyone. We're so excited about this campaign and I'm really grateful to be here to talk about how climate finance fits into this picture. My amazing colleagues on the panel have been talking about the exciting and important work that needs to be done for a full, fast, feminist, forever phase out of fossil fuels. But I want to talk about why climate finance, and specifically climate finance for the US, is contributing to climate action in developing countries is an essential part of this phase out and how it's connected to this year's negotiations. So while this campaign has always been focused on fossil fuel phase out, the intention was to be really rooted in a fair shares approach, because that's both what is demanded by climate justice and also science and equity. Considering the United States' historical responsibility and capacity or wealth, there was no amount of climate action that was going to be able to be done in the short term, just in the US, to actually adequately meet our fair share. And that's true when you're talking about a phase out as well. So while we need a phase out of production and consumption of fossil fuels in the United States as quickly as possible, and we are calling for 2031, that isn't actually enough. So part of our fair shares is the climate finance contributions to enable other countries to be phasing out and ensuring a just transition to clean and renewable energy in their countries and communities far earlier than would be possible without that kind of support. So when I talk about climate finance and I am pitching folks on why climate finance is important, I usually have sort of two tracks of arguments. And the first one is the moral argument, because countries are being hammered by impacts they did absolutely nothing to create. We hear it all the time in these calls, but it is absolutely true. Those who did the least are getting hit worst and first. And that is, you heard from Roishetta that happens inside the United States, and that's also part of the story internationally. The most vulnerable are absolutely being hurt, and without action, you know, as 130 million people living in the most vulnerable countries could be pushed further into extreme poverty due to climate change just in the next 6 years. So it's really essential and critical to a moral future that we address this and recognize that those communities absolutely deserve and must have support to cope with the impacts and to pursue the transitions that are needed coming. But there's also a pragmatic aspect to this. We need a rapid phase out of fossil fuels starting right now. The carbon budget simply does not allow for anything else. No new fossil fuel infrastructure, no new fossil fuel expansion. We have to start a phase down. We have to start a phase out right now. But that is not going to happen unless all countries acknowledge that it is fair. Considering the oil and gas expansion that we have seen in the US, how are we going to tell other countries, you need to turn down that, you know, fossil fuels you just discovered, because we need a global phase out? If we're not matching that both with domestic action and with support to actually enable them to do that. 93% of countries that are most vulnerable to the climate crisis right now are in a significant risk of debt distress. And what that essentially means is that those countries are right now struggling so much with their debt payments, they don't have enough money to actually respond to the climate crisis that is hitting them. They don't have enough money to adapt and raise the seawalls and build up, move their houses higher And then we're now coming in and saying, oh, also you have to phase out what few emissions you are doing right now. That's just not going to happen without support. Global South debt payments by some calculations are 12 times greater than their current climate adaptation spending. And that is not because they do not need to be spending more on climate adaptation. That is because the debt service payments often cannot wait, because the consequences for missing those debt service payments are so intensive. So it is pragmatic, like it is the right thing to do, but also this phase out is not going to happen if we do not see real climate finance flowing to developing countries. Further reliance on private loans, high interest rates is just only going to exacerbate this problem. We need high quality grant-based climate finance flowing to help this transition. Otherwise, it is not going to happen. So how is that connected both to last year's global stocktake and to this year's expected outcome on the new climate finance goal, which is being called the NCQG if you have been sufficiently indoctrinated to the acronyms around here. So last year there was a breakthrough agreement about phasing out fossil fuels that was in the global stocktake. And we are expecting, starting probably actually in the next week or so, but through the beginning of next year, to have all countries submit new nationally determined contributions. So these are what they are promising to do over the next decade on climate action. So what we really want is those agreements in that global stocktake to get reflected in those new NDCs. And that includes fossil fuel phase out and phase down. For developed countries like the US, that should be putting ambitious targets on when they're going to phase out fossil fuels. But we need all countries to be thinking about how this is going to happen. And that's only going to happen if developing countries think that climate finance is going to come. If they don't believe that there's any chance that any climate finance is coming, the NDCs are not going to be as ambitious. They're not going to be comfortable talking about a fossil fuel phase out that they might then get blamed for not enacting if no climate finance is coming. So that's why this COP's outcome and that new climate finance target is so essential. We really need a strong climate finance goal to provide that assurance so that we can see strong, ambitious NDCs. And so CAN International is calling for an NCQG of at least 1 trillion in grant-based or grant equivalent climate finance to be decided at this COP. And I do say at least, because if you look at the actual climate debt of developed countries to developing countries, it is actually considerably higher. But 1 trillion is what, at least 1 trillion is what we're calling for. And the quality of that climate finance is really important. And by that, I mean, climate finance can sometimes be, the term climate finance is sometimes used broadly, I will say, and covers some types of finance flows that don't really meet what is sort of the core UNFCCC understanding of what climate finance is. So when we are talking about the kind of climate finance flows we want to see grant-based support from rich developed countries to developing countries. Loans, that are going to be adding to the debt burden are not climate finance. Carbon market mechanisms are not climate finance. These are not actually going to enable the transition that we need. So we need an NCQG and a climate finance goal that not only sets an ambitious target as far as the amount, but also is really clear about the quality and the type of assistance that needs to be provided. Only when we set that goal and the finance starts flowing are we actually going to be able to see a global fossil fuel phase out. Thank you.
So much, Kelly, and I'm going to turn over to our last speaker, and then we will have time for questions from you all. So I'm thrilled to introduce our last speaker, who is Dolan, the coordinator of programs and policy for Women's Environment and Development Organization. Mara is a feminist organizer, student, and writer. at the Women's Environment and Development Organization. She works on policy research, advocacy, and coalition building among feminists and climate justice. Whatever it takes.
Hey folks, can you hear me okay? Okay, wonderful. My name is Mara. I work at the Women's Environment Development Organization, and we are a 30-year-old global advocacy organization that sits at the intersection of gender and climate justice. And we are really committed to and invested in ensuring that the feminist global climate justice movement is connected and strong and powerful. And that includes, of course, ensuring that US advocacy is in solidarity with and led by global justice aims. So you've heard folks speak to a fossil fuel phase out that needs to be funded, that needs to be fair, that needs to be forever, that needs to be, what's the one I'm forgetting? Fast, thank you. And I'm gonna just offer a few words on why we include feminist. So feminist analysis teaches us to think critically about power and systems change. It's not just asking where are women in leadership or adding women to the policy and stirring. It's really about fundamentally examining how systems of oppression, from white supremacy to patriarchy to capitalism, shape people's lived realities and how we have to challenge them to build something new. So I'll briefly move through 3 ways, there are probably more, that a transition off of fossil fuels and towards a new world needs to be feminist in order to be just. So first, women activists, feminists, eco-feminists, women's human rights defenders have painstakingly over generations illustrated the connection between bodily autonomy and extractivism and the need for an ethic of consent to really permeate our policy. Frontline defenders and Indigenous women and Two-Spirit peoples have long sounded the alarm in the US about the crisis of gender-based violence that is connected to fossil fuel production. Known to many as man camps, when fossil fuel companies come to town, it is well documented that there are increases in gender-based and sexual violence against women and gender diverse people, and that the corporate power of fossil fuel companies, paired with institutionalized patriarchy and racism, protects these men and fossil fuel companies from accountability and justice. This is intimately connected to the crisis of missing and murdered Indigenous women and Two-Spirit peoples, which we must lift up every day, but especially today, as many of us are wearing red in honor of Indigenous women and their leadership. Many of the minerals that are mined for use in renewable energy, like lithium, can produce the same dynamics of harm and violations of consent as fossil fuels do. And activists, for example, in Nevada are already sounding the alarm about man camps near lithium mines and the increase in gender-based violence in the area. So a phase out of fossil fuels alone doesn't mean this violence ends. We have to be purposeful and intentional to make sure that it isn't recreated through critical minerals mining. An ethic of consent in a fossil fuel phase out requires us to honor FPIC, honor bodily autonomy and the safety of women and gender diverse peoples, and the right to live free from violence in all its forms. Second, the fossil fuel health, impacts on our bodies or gender. They are racialized, and the phase out must recognize and repair this harm. Colleagues on the panel have really gone deep into some of these aspects of harm and violence that are caused by fossil fuels, and I'm going to just briefly highlight some that are gendered. So living near fossil fuel production sites and exposure to chemicals has been correlated with horrific impacts on reproductive health, and has been shown to increase incidence of ovarian and breast cancers, as well as causing poor pregnancy outcomes, including stillbirths, early pregnancy loss, and low birth weights. We also know that climate impacts caused by fossil fuels, like extreme heat and pollution, have distinct impacts on reproductive health. So we can't take a one-size-fits-all approach to healing and preventing further health impacts during a fossil fuel phase-out. We have to understand where and how they are shaped by gender, race, and income. Phasing out fossil fuels in a feminist way means that we will demand repair, for example, ensuring fossil fuel companies who have poisoned the reproductive health of neighboring communities are actually held responsible for covering all their healthcare costs, investing in building infrastructure that the community demands, and other community-driven accountability mechanisms. Thirdly, a feminist phase out of fossil fuels requires us to actually think critically about what kind of energy economy we're building next, and how we build it to erode gendered and racialized inequalities and injustices that exist in this one. So what do I mean by this? It's essential to understand that this fossil fuel-based economy is really built on the backs of women, especially women of color, through the invisible and rarely discussed reality of care work. Care work is the labor that we all rely on, but is rarely valued, rarely compensated, and is not understood through traditional and male-dominated labor protections and frameworks. Care work is the work that makes all other work possible. Some care workers exist in unionized formal sectors like healthcare, education, and childcare, but most do not. Their care work is performed as the second or third shift. It's performed without labor protections, without the right to unionize. It's the work of childcare, elder care, domestic work, land stewardship, and capitalism might not see and recognize these workers, but without a doubt, if this labor stopped tomorrow, the economy would collapse. It is an unimaginably big unpaid subsidy to the US and global economy, and it is overwhelmingly women who perform it. So since care work is the invisible unpaid infrastructure of our current fossil fuel economy, if we are not intentional about changing it during this phase out, care work will simply transition to being the invisible unpaid infrastructure of any new economy. A so-called green economy or renewable energy economy could still be built on the backs of women and their unpaid labor. So if this is the case, we know that the racial and gendered injustice of care work will simply persist in jobs after fossil fuel phase out if nothing is done. Renewable energy jobs are already overwhelmingly white and male, and one of the main barriers that's cited by women and people of color accessing these jobs is a lack of care infrastructure, given their disproportionate care work burden. Without things like universal child care, elder care, investments in public quality accessible care infrastructure systems, these jobs will not benefit everyone. So even if the fossil fuel phase out creates millions of good paying unionized jobs, if they are only accessible to white men, are we really sharing the benefits of this just transition for all? Are we building an economy with more racial and gender justice, or just the same economic inequalities, but with solar panels instead of oil? Additionally, many care jobs are already the kinds of jobs that we need to invest in for our fossil fuel phase out. Jobs that are low carbon, life-giving, life-sustaining, life-saving, community-centered work. It is invaluable work that we all rely on, and it should be compensated as such. The climate crisis will only amplify the need for care in response to increasing health impacts and disaster response needs, and this work is so critical to communities' resilience and adaptation. So what would a fossil fuel phase out that created pathways for fossil fuel workers or workers in fossil fuel impacted industries to transition to care work look like? What would it look like if we invested in care jobs as green jobs too? What would it look like to provide accessible care infrastructure to everyone so that mothers of kids or people caring for their elders also had access to these unionized energy jobs without paying half of their paycheck to someone to take care of their loved ones? This is to see the phase out as a way to challenge existing gender and racial injustices in a fossil fuel-based economy and build something new in its place. So I'll just close by reiterating those three things that I hope folks take away. The feminist pillar of this phase out helps us illuminate that we need an ethic of consent, repair and recognition for the gendered health impacts of fossil fuels, and serious consideration and integration of care work as a valued part of the economy. Thanks.
Thank you to all the fabulous speakers on the panel. Everyone did such an amazing job outlining what this campaign means and why, what we're specifically asking for as a campaign. And so just to kind of summarize, really ensuring that a fossil fuel phase out is on a timeline that is mandated by science, so that we need it essentially right now. And one of the specific actions that the Biden administration made is finalizing an ambitious NDC that includes a commitment to phase out fossil fuels and ensure that this phase out is free from false illusions and climate scams. We also heard that frontline communities need to be included in the decision-making process and need to be prioritized as they are overburdened already by fossil fuel pollution. And they have the solution. We've also heard of the need to utilize a fair shares approach, and specifically a specific action the Biden administration made is ensuring a strong climate finance goal. And then lastly, a fossil fuel phase out, in order to be just, it needs to be feminist. And so I'd love to turn it over to, we have some folks on Zoom and also to the folks in the room if we have any questions. I don't think we have a walking mic, but if it could just be, oh, we do have a walking mic. Oh, perfect. So if you have a question, just raise your hand, we'll try to get you the mic, and then I'll be looking at Zoom. If folks have questions on Zoom, please go ahead and enter them in the chat, and we will work our best to get to everyone.
Hi, friends. So thank you for all your presentations. I have a question about like how we make this a reality, given the fact that Trump was just elected into as president again. And, what we can do locally as well as the legislative levels to like actually make this happen, in this space.
Speak the truth. Okay, so I would say that, I mean, I think that the federal options are gonna be really quite close for the next couple of years, and that it is gonna be about defending what we have thus far, because I think that the incoming administration has been pretty clear about their intentions. I think we should believe what they are saying. And what looks to be an entirely Republican Congress, seems inclined to give the incoming administration everything they want. I think that the challenge is going to be, figuring out ways to do it anyway. Like, we don't have an option of just sitting and waiting for the, political climate to get better. So it is gonna be about finding the opportunities at the local level, at the state level, you know, every different aspect we can to push where we can. It's gonna be watching every single court case, and there's gonna be a lot, and a lot of them aren't gonna go our way because the court has also seen a lot of turnover. But we don't have an option of giving up. I do think that there are still things that can be done together, and I think that also that one of the things that we're articulating here is a vision of a better future. This isn't just a climate safe future, it's a better future. And so I think there's a lot of work to be done to talk about what that is and start bringing it into place where we can, whether that's, you know, organizing for resilience in your community, to natural disasters, or a huge state level policy in a large state with economic power. And it's gonna be finding those opportunities. Where I think this is hardest is climate finance. There's not really a good replacement for the US federal government on climate finance. But I think that some of it is gonna be building, you know, the Biden administration has not been great on climate finance. They've been incredibly disappointing over the past 4 years, actually. So some of what we need to do is building to the point so that when there is another opportunity, we do much better than we did for the past 4 years. And then also working with our allies in other countries that are donor countries, like Australia and Japan and the EU, to say you cannot follow the US down this route. Oh, and that's my last point, actually. I don't think there were many consequences last time when the Trump administration pulled out of the Paris Agreement and was a wrecking ball to multilateral climate policy. And I think there should be diplomatic consequences this time. Like, this should not be seen as permission for the rest of the world to hide on climate policy for the next 4 years.
Yeah, I think we want to echo some of the things. We've had 4 years of a Biden administration, and what has been accomplished? I mean, what are we really afraid of? A nation that's built on the genocide and slavery elected fascist white supremacists. A shocking thing? No. I mean, I think in America we have this illusion that you know, there's good guys and the bad guys. That we once again are looking at a bird with the right wing and the left wing. And it's a system of oppression that we still have to fight. We fought hard under Biden. We fought diligently hard, and we had allies in the White House. We had allies in decision-making stations. But what has been accomplished? I think, you know, if the US decides to ridiculously pull out of the Paris Accord and, you know, within scope, pull out of the entire framework process, then it opens up the door for the rest of the world to really unite. You know, the United States acts as obstructionists and as bullies in these international spaces on our behalf. And if we're not in the room, then the rest of the world has an opportunity to pass logical, progressive climate legislation that will have massive impacts on the world. And so when the United States, if it does ever return back to a sense of democracy and normalcy and global collaboration, then we'll be able to not deny the progressive policies that are being passed in international spaces. And this is a great reason for us to be working internationally. I would encourage you all to just not give up hope, really try to find ways that you can solidify what's taking place in your own states domestically, but really open up your mind and realize that one nation will not be able to save the planet. The time for small increment steps has passed us. We need to take a giant quantum leap into the future together globally. And without the big bully in the room and obstructionist USA going around and pushing their military might, we can actually see some beautiful things arise out of the destruction in the United States.
I'll just add as well, I think, I think a lot about the way that this campaign and this vision is applicable at like the interpersonal level, as well as what I think is probably the first thing that came to folks' mind, which is like advocacy towards the US government and the state level. And I think feminist analysis has taught us that the personal is political, and the way that we treat each other is representative of our political orientation and the way that we can live our values. And I think when I reflect on this ethic of consent and this ethic of care, that I was naming as being crucial to thinking about how we think about land and bodily autonomy, I think that for me really shows up in how we take care of each other, and how we take care of each other in the midst of compounding crises. And I think, you know, it's no surprise and news to many folks in this room that when disasters strike in many places around the world, but I'll speak specifically in the US right now, it is people who are taking care of each other and their neighbors and their communities, and that are often on the front lines of ensuring that folks have access to food, shelter, water, healthcare. And that is a systemic failure of the US government to provide direct relief. You know, I'm thinking about the recent disasters and hurricanes in the Southeast, among others. But the power of mutual aid and the power of communities really determining their needs and finding the resources through connection and care with folks deep in solidarity, thousands of miles away, is something that we're going to have to learn a lot from and replicate, you know, tenfold. And I think that for me is one of the most beautiful examples of the ethic of care and consent being lived out in the way that folks responded to disaster themselves and took care of each other. So I think for me, there is this piece as well about just like really steeling ourselves around the kind of care and protection and defense of each other, and in particular those on the front lines and who are land defenders and water defenders. Like, what is the work that we'll need to do to really take care of each other and protect each other as best we can with the resources that we have, which are plentiful and are powerful? And how is that living through this ethic of care and consent as well, rather than believing it can only be lived through policy?
Yeah, that question.
Yes, I think you just answered that question, but I'm like, I don't think you see it or not. But thank you for recognizing, because, I mean, and I echo and agree with a lot with what you said. I think there are some things that we can do as community members, as frontline organizations, grassroots organizations. I think that, you know, coming together, maintaining our community, empowering our community, make sure, making sure that we're holding them close in these next 4 years, but not going in with any assumption. We can't assume that people know the harms and the dangers that are impacting them right now. We can't assume that people know what's at stake here. We have to go in, you know, ready to educate and be there for our communities and help them to see what it is that impacted them. to this election, I saw a lot of things that were shocking to me as it relates to my community members that I have. So here in my community, I have for a environmental justice organization, the local project, so always providing the needs of my community. But I was shocked to see how community members we're talking about, things are already better since Trump been elected, and it made me think like, do people seriously think that the day after the election, this person is now the president? So do we have to go back to civic 101 and educate on how government work and how it is important that people not only have the largest elections, but also the smaller elections, maybe ensuring that community folks are who are running all of the ballots and we're voting, mayoral races and local government races and all of these. They're important, and we shouldn't just be mobilized when it comes down to the presidential race. I think that's where we need to fail this time. But to the point of being accomplished anything during the Biden administration, I think there were some bold moves that were made, and then we need to act on those moves, particularly and in 875 days while I was the president, first previous administration to act on some of the things that have been put in place, like the IRA, for example, ensuring that those IRA funds and those business funds get down to those communities as quickly as possible. Ensuring that the Department of Energy, that the Biden administration works with the Department of Energy to conclusively determine that imports are not in the public interest, finalizing tickets for DOE survey and technology, so that we can lay the groundwork for the to find that they're not in the public interest, rejecting the current energy projects, including two of those projects that are in my community, two Lake Cross LNG, making sure that this administration rejects those projects outright, finalizing the review of state regulations, including California's legal standards and innovative decarbonization, passed the Energy Permitting Reform Act of 2024, working with the federal mortgage regulators to finalize federal mortgage rules, directing agencies to remove outdated guidance because Trump is already saying that he's gonna let the new EPA administrator is. So the Biden for some of these things and some of these things now, while he's still the city president and make this the most bold active lane justice ever, then I think we have a fair chance of going forward. I mean, people say we could have been done in the last 4 years, but I think we have set the foundation for these things done in our hard work and organizing. And so we can't just stop working. We have to continue to push, continue to mobilize, continue to organize, continue to work together, but ensure that we are first and foremost holding our community close, ensure that we are caring for community members, ensure that they have everything that they need in order to be ready for this fight for the next 4 years, 8 years, however long it's going to take for us to fully transition and phase out fossil fuels.
And we do have a question from online and summarize it. So it's just highlighting how we've seen kind of trends, particularly in light of the recent election results around leaning more toward, and this question specifically calls out young men leaning towards the denial of science and denial of climate science. And so the question is, with incoming administration, what can be done to reverse this trend within the just transition framework?
Interesting because in my response to the last question, I was going to bring this up. And the fact that I think the one thing that we do all have in our kind of back pockets is the superpower of people power, of organizing, of the opportunity to really strengthen our community building and be there for each other in a way that we haven't been, at least recently, that maybe were before all of the chaos of capitalism, et cetera, took over. And what I find the most concerning as someone in Gen Z who has been looked to as the inclusive generation, as the generation that will save the planet, is that that's a lot of people in our generation that don't think that a lot of the young people I'm seeing in this room right now deserve to have any opportunities in life across all different types of diversities and scales. And that's scary, you know, you don't know who you can talk to about what. And I think that though there is a contrast between that, you also look at that demographic of people, and a lot of them are coming from communities that likely have climate change education, race education, other types of intersectional education that are not part of their school and education systems. And so when we're thinking about the system and the reason that people might be voting one way or the other, it also comes back to that very system that we are growing up with and that we're surrounded by. And so I think to combat it is one, let's get louder about climate change. I started this by saying we need to full send, the government needs to full send, but so do we. It's not an excuse to walk back and to be upset. It's a reason to be louder, to bring climate change, not just as a discussion that we might have around our kitchen tables or on the bus, but to really every part of our communities and our jobs, and to be proud that we are people that have the power and have the knowledge and the courage to really step up and fight for what that means, not just for ourselves, but all of the communities, especially those that aren't often afforded the same opportunities that we have here to have our voices heard. And I think that it is going to take work, but listen, if anyone's trying to go on a road show with me and show up places, I'll come. Maybe an electric bus road show, I don't know. But I do think that there are really great reasons for us to be louder, to be prouder, to be there for each other. And then that's one of the best things that we can do to tackle climate change, especially in the next 4 years.
I would just say, I would add that, as an organizer, I feel like we really have to build and describe and tell a story of the future that we are moving towards. And that future is one that we've all described in really powerful and different ways. It's one in which people's needs are cared for. It's one in which people thrive. It is one in which people find community and care and joy, and in which the planet thrives. And I feel like we have a space for everyone in that world, and we need to make really clear how our story appeals to everyone. And I think as an organizer, I'm really interested in thinking about, as a white person, I'm really interested in thinking about like what my role is in mobilizing other white people to challenge white supremacy and challenge the racism that is so pervasive in the US and is exemplified by this election, but is not singular to this election by any means. And so I think as organizers, I think we're all sort of thinking about what we are moving towards and building towards in our campaigning and in our conversations and canvassing. And I think for me, I'm still mulling this over, but I think I am interested in better articulating the story of the world that we are moving towards, and making it. It's a beautiful world, right? It's a beautiful world, and I feel like people really respond to and desire a world in which they feel seen and they feel held and they feel in community. And I want to build that world for everyone. And so I think that's the task of organizers moving forward, and it's a big one. But I think that we have the vision to do it.
Thanks for the question. I will say, it is easy in sort of an immediate aftermath of an election like this to sort of look around for a single reason or a single group to say what happened there. And I would just say that it is still early days yet. I think there's still a lot of information to learn, and I think a lot of reflection to doing, and probably a fair share of blame to go around. In our sort of inability in the inability sort of to articulate sort of the stakes of this election. I do think it's kind of like the person asked a question about just transition. There is a just transition work program that's being discussed right now. And I think it was mentioned in connection with men, because just transition was one of the sort of core aspects of a just transition is about transitioning the workforce. And I think that speaks to what both Hailey and Mara were talking about as far as like articulating this world and ensuring that folks are confident in their place in it. And I think that there are a lot of discussions still to undergo about that and about making it real. Yeah, and I think that yeah, there's still a lot of data to unpack. So I think it's a little too early to sort of look at any singular group and say, well, this is clearly what happened, and therefore X number of electoral votes were lost. But I do think that there is a clear signal about the dangers of sort of the immediate, of people feeling that their immediate future is not being met, and the immediacy of sort of the challenges that they are facing, and how that can overwhelm what is tomorrow's problem, even if tomorrow is in fact tomorrow. And there is a challenge there as we are talking about this transition, because the longer we delay these kinds of fossil fuel phase out challenges and this kind of climate action, the more difficult it gets, right? If we had actually started phasing out fossil fuels when these COPs started, and a decent percentage of the people in this room were either infants or had not been born, we probably would not be here, people. And so I do think that there is something that we are going to have to wrestle with, that tension coming more and more into force, in that the longer we wait, the harder the transition, and the more turmoil we're going to see in the short term, and the then greater challenge in sort of getting people to buy into this better future that we need to get to. But that is what the organizing work is about.
Please bring up this question, but no pressure. And this will be our last one, because we have to pass it up.
Thank you very much. I'm really touched with the dreams, and I wish we can have a fair and a just planet that is all free. My question goes to all of us in the room. In developing countries, you're phasing out the fossil fuels, right? But you are promoting the carbon market in the developing countries. How will we achieve the planet that we are dreaming of? To me, it seems like we are finding a solution or an antidote of a virus in the other room, but also creating another virus in another room.
You know, I think that these schemes, these mechanisms, they're used to entice developing countries to give in to demands of richer white dominated countries. You know, I think that there's a lot of push, and you don't have a whole lot of economic opportunities, then you're often utilized by rich corporations who want to take those communities and exploit them, extract them, and, you know, do all the horrible things. Domestically in the US, you know, we have these company towns, and we have these people who lift the boots of corporations and people along those lines to try to get some economic interest. And we can't be mad that people want to eat, right? They just gotta eat. We gotta pay bills. So we gotta find a way that we don't sell our souls in order to help Elon Musk become the head of the EPA. Right, we want to make sure that we're not living into this neoliberal concepts that these corporate schemes and these capitalistic beliefs are going to save ourselves. You know, I think that once we start recognizing that the only way for us to stop polluting is to stop polluting and not trade one community's health for another, the more that we can see evolution for humanity. You know, I think there's this evolution coming by where we can pollute and do all these horrible things one way and then protect the land someplace else. And oftentimes these carbon trading, carbon sequestering things are perpetuating genocide. You know, the carbon capture, the land protection is often utilized by governments that are trying to get rid of their indigenous population. And they will sell those lands that are inhabited by indigenous people and sell them off to the largest corporate bidder and say that they're the ones who are protecting the planet because they're saving this acre of forest in the Amazon. But that's not fair. It's not true. And I think that the more that we wake up to these lies and schemes, the more that it strengthens us and really helps us to define that future that's being articulated up here so beautifully. You know, there is a future that is healthy and just and livable, and it's within reach and it's within grasp. And we must really, really embody that future that we truly desire together in the face of adversity, in the face of obstacles, and really come together to believe that this future is something that is attainable. It's not something false. It's so often that we are forced with the scientists telling us that we're facing an apocalypse. You see it in the media, that the end of the world is here, the end of times, the three horsemen of the apocalypse, it's all here. But as an indigenous person who's already living in a country that has been colonized and exploited and genocide built on our lands, we understand that we can still resilient, we can assert our resilience and really you know, find a life in the aftermath. We're already living in a post-apocalyptic world, and it's important for us to remember that the end never is in sight, that there is always something new, that as the old world dies, a new one is created, and we must really define that together with peace, with love and unity, and more importantly, to create these global networks that we so desperately need to give us the power to set free from these capitalist systems that will just do nothing but destroy us.
Well, unfortunately, we are at time. I want to thank you all for being here in the room with us, and also if we can do another